Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 64 of Relating to DevSecOps, where we explore the development, security, and operational issues of today so that we can solve real world problems with people that face them. We're your hosts, Ken Toller, and
Mike McCabe. I can't be
we're,
this podcasty.
we're it's too early in the afternoon, but we're doing it anyway because we are committed to getting back on this 2 week schedule. And so it's daylight outside. Another daytime episode from us today. Hopefully, you all are having a great week. Today, we're going to talk about mitigation. To Mike's suggestion, Mike, tell us a little bit about why you want to talk about mitigation. I mean, I think that we are definitely all on board with that. We've been talking about how to find vulnerabilities, how to build programs, how to get hired or hire, and I don't think we've had an episode focused on just remediation, mitigation, figuring out how to work through all that. So, thoughts? What brings this topic to the table today?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from the work that we do in the consulting space, and the fact that I feel like traditionally consulting has always been about like tell the client what's wrong, like write up that long report that says you have these 50 issues, and we'll see you next year when you have to do your SOC 2 audit or just your annual pen test or whatever it is. And then the next year you show up and the same findings are in the report. I mean, we've all probably done assessments where it's like you're finding the exact same stuff as last year. You just update the report date and send it again. And I think it's we might get a little philosophical here, but I feel like it's a philosophical issue in the industry where you think about like DEF CON, all it's about is what's broken in technology, which is definitely an important thing to figure out. You can't solve a risk if you don't know what it is. But there's very little focus on like fixing things, versus if you think about like the dev world where it's about building and fixing issues and testing for or like automated ways to fix things and testing for fixing things. And I just feel like we focus a ton on breaking things, but how much are we doing to actually fixing things? Because telling someone there's a risk there, that's only like the really first step. The next step is really actually fixing it because that's what actually reduces the risk if you can't put a compensating control in. So it's kind of a ranty thing that I have in my head because we do a lot of work, we do a lot of assessments, and we want people to fix the issues we find. And I think part of that falls in the security industry of not providing the right advice or the right view on how to solve these issues. And so you see the same things year after year.
Yeah, and I think we did talk a little bit about this when we were speaking around bug bounties and what folks were incentivized to do, and that they're not incentivized to mitigate things. And I think the conversation there went more like developers are incentivized to build and security folks are incentivized to break. But I think we're coming at it in the lines of like, how can we make mitigation and remediation a larger part of the conversation?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think the question goes to you is like, what do you think that we can do to get folks to focus on mitigation, or what can we do either on the consulting side or industry side to help folks focus on that?
I mean, I think one part of it is mindset of like, I think there's so many security people who they find a bunch of stuff in a pen test, or if you're internal and you get a pen test and there's 20 results, they just want to like shake their operations teams and be like, just fix this crap. It's like it's so simple, just fix it. But they don't always have the context of what it actually takes to fix things. We were just having a conversation about this with someone, and like you could turn off TOS dot o because Nessus tells you that's an issue, and then some service that only can speak 1.0 breaks, and you're breaking some process by upgrading the security of your TOS connection. So I think it's just like security has to understand that there's more to it, there's more context, there's more steps to it, and offer, I think more in-depth remediation advice to how to solve these issues. I think one thing that's always really helped from the consulting side is having people who do development do the consulting versus having just security people who are there to break stuff do the consulting. Like you're not going to get a plumber to come in and look at your car to tell you advice. So why would you have someone who doesn't really understand the like technology behind the scenes tell you what's wrong and how to fix it? So you need to have that view. Um, Even though my plumber is a great auto mechanic, just
Well,
no, my car's always broken.
yeah, I mean, I think that there is, I
I
think
see you.
that
I see you. You wanna debate. I can see it already.
I do. I mean, we're okay with debate on this show. I think that you you have different skill sets, right? I don't think that there are a couple folks that exist out there. I don't think that there's really a lot of people that are going to do well at both finding security issues and remediating them. And I think that it's just a factor of time, which is that you are focused on finding issues, and so you get really good at at finding issues, and you're not immersed in the context of the application, like you were saying. If they lack context, we lack context that engineers will have that are working on that application. So that collaboration, that collaborative effort of working towards the same goal, I think is the key so that you can take advantage of both skill sets. So I think that it's interesting to think about, like, you want folks that know the underlying technology, sure, know the framework, sure, know the language, sure. But I do think that there is something to be said for someone that's immersed in security and someone that's immersed in development or immersed in engineering, and that they're going to provide different takes on the same problem. And I think that it's more about listening to the other side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you, and I think that's true. Um, Obviously, as a consultant, you're not always going to have full context. Even if you're an internal security person, you're not going to have full context of, the entire environment. Like, that's just not realistic. Um, Even AppSec folks, they can't know the architecture of every one of their apps if there's, 100 apps internally and
Yeah.
not enough time.
Yep.
But I think the thing is I think that's the issue that I'm kind of bringing up is that it might not be that you don't have the context as a consultant, but I get that there's people who are really good at breaking things and there's people who are good at fixing things. And a lot of times that skill set is not within the same person. But then I feel like we're always paying for just half of what we need. People are getting consultants to tell them what's
Yeah.
wrong, but that doesn't solve anything. So I think the issue really comes back to like, is it the client's fault that a consultant doesn't know the context of what they're trying to fix? Like you're paying them $200 to $300 an hour to tell you what's wrong with your application. Why is it on them to be like, okay, well, let me go hire this other person to tell me how to fix things? Because I just feel like I totally get where you're coming from. Um, it's rare that you will have both those skill sets. And that's why I think AppSec folks and cloud folks coming from a dev background is kind of helpful because they understand the ecosystem and are familiar with it. But I mean, I kind of say it's like security people should be familiar with this if this is what their domain is.
Yeah.
They should be
No,
developers, even if they're not professional developers.
no, I don't disagree with you there. I think that there is an element of you need to have some familiarity with what you are doing. Like, I think that the time of pure dynamic testers in applications is gone, in my opinion. Like, I think that if you are just testing applications and you can't articulate how that might manifest in code, or you can't read code, I think that you are way behind at this stage in the game. But I think that there's like the focus on the mitigation aspect of it for me. It is, you, as a consultant, you want to provide the most in-depth remediation that you possibly can. I think that the best consultants do, and they will try to gain the context and provide something that's customized to the client. But I think that fundamentally that adds time to an engagement and cost to an engagement that may not always be attractive to a client. So I think that there's two aspects there. One is, what is the client value? If the client really values this um, end-to-end experience of, like, you give me the full scope of the application, you tell me what's wrong with it, and you provide me like really strong remediation guidance, we would have to say we do all of these things for the same cost as that person that's going to do it in 2 weeks and just give you the raw results that you need. And some clients are like, just give me the results, we'll take care of it, because maybe they're jaded by previous experiences or whatever. And I think it takes a lot of time to build up that reputation. And I think some consulting orgs just don't, like, we do have to do a better job, but it's kind of like there is a business to be run there. And I think it's really hard. It's a hard problem because the most impactful, um, arguably, the most impactful element of the security world is the discovery of the vulnerability, and the least impactful is the most important thing, which is the mitigation. Because if I've mitigated it correctly, then there's nothing to really show for it. But that's sort of the time old tale of the fact that we are constantly, if we're doing a good job, there's nothing to show for it, you know.
Hmm.
And I think that we consistently struggle with that. So I think finding, a good way to find that balance. Was one of the things I was um, talking to a colleague about the other day was, um, we were talking about this initiative, this bug bounty initiative, where um, it was just around like how to better compensate researchers that find really great bugs or really great vulnerabilities, and like organizations trying to sort of skirt around. Um, is it that serious or not? And does the community agree on the severity of a bug and all these kinds of things? And to me, it's like I almost feel like that's the wrong conversation. To me, it's more about like, why are we really pushing towards this reactive model of getting people to discover things after the fact, and we're not really focused on incentivizing the mitigations. When a how many bounties have you received where it's just like, hey, you have this issue, like, pay me, you know and it's like, okay, fine, like 90,000 people have found this, this certificate authority problem that you're talking about, and you're working through this thing. So like, how do you, let's solve the root issue. And we don't really incentivize that as an industry, that sort of collective thought of mitigation. Do we reward people that submit PRs to open source projects that have mitigated a security vulnerability? No, you know.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that we
But I mean,
incentivize the wrong stuff.
I think you just agreed with my original point. You
I mean, I,
started
I
you started
definitely
with
agree
you
with you.
started with a disagreement and you circled back around to an agreement. So
Yeah.
one
I mean,
one point
this
for
is
me.
my this is my arguing. This is my debate prowess at its finest. No, I always. I mean, I do agree. I do agree on the need. I just don't know that the industry supports it. And I mean, I have trouble figure navigating that myself as well. But I think that that's why we're in that problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree the industry doesn't support it. I guess that's sort of my complaint, which is like, as an industry, as a capitalistic enterprise, it makes sense to sell a service with every year you like they have to do it because of SOC, or they have to do it because they just have to have an annual pen test or whatever. And then you find the same results every year. You load up that report with as many findings as possible, and just year after year, you do the same stuff. Like that makes sense to make money for a consulting company. But I think like uh, from a altruistic, you know, shouldn't we be providing value to our clients' perspective, not just doing a thing to make money? I feel like we need to go further than just like, here's a report full of issues. We'll see you next year. We'll invoice you shortly. Like that's kind of my point is like you said, bug bounty is like the rage because it's like, oh, it's another way to find bugs. It's using economics to scale up testing relatively cheaply to find bugs. Okay, great. We have a million bugs and more stuff to fix, more stuff to find. And I think there actually is like some ways that incentivizes people to fix things because it's more public. But um, again, it's security is all about finding the issues versus fixing the issues. And I think that's like salespeople sell what they know, people buy what they know, and that's kind of the paradigm that has to change, which is let's stop focusing just on finding stuff. You do have to find stuff because you can't fix things without finding stuff, but like it's like if you go to a doctor and like you have heart disease and they're like, all right, what should I do about it? They're like, that's not really my job. I just tell you what's wrong. You got to figure it out on your own. Go read WebMD. I'm great with analogies, by the way. And so I feel like we do a little bit of it. And yeah, if you're just in like a straight up pen test or people who run, Nessus and then kick you the results, like there's only so much you can really do in that very tight timeline or cheap pen test. But I think there's a lot more engagements where you are doing a source code review, you are doing an in-depth review where you have the ability to give very good advice that someone should just be able to take and implement. Maybe they change it a little bit, maybe they make it more, their coding style or whatever, and then they fix the issue and it's solved longer term. But I think we've talked about this a lot. Like different clients are different. Some are amazing and fix stuff right away. Some are the ones you're going to have the same findings year over year, no matter how well you explain it. But I do think the incentives are still wrong between
Yeah.
security and what is best for the client.
Right. And I think that we're faced with this problem. See if I can articulate this in like one sentence. Is that we basically have two options then. If we want to reach the happy, altruistic, providing as much value as possible thing, I think that we either need to be willing to do much more work for the same amount of money, or we convince clients to pay much more for more work. And I think that the perception to clients or the perception to the general security client is that the more results that you find, the better of an organization you are. So, how can we showcase the value of a confidently empty report?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're doing a first time test for an organization and you give them an empty report, they're definitely going to be like, "What did we just pay for?" And you're going to be like, "What did I
Yep.
just charge for?" Which, I think that's incredibly rare. I've definitely seen some empty pen test reports, or it's like one TOS finding on one server, and you're like, "There's no way this is possible." But I mean, there's also a lot of crappy pen test firms out there who just do. There's a lot of CPAs acting as pen test people out there. I'll say that. I've seen
Yeah, I
quite a few
mean,
of those reports.
I'm with you. And that I think that's the part I struggle with is I know that like I'm with you in that we have these problems, but the part that I always struggle with is that you know you can give a great report. Some of the best firms out there, like they give great reports, they describe them well, they customize all the results to the client, they even customize their mediations to the client, and they charge a pretty penny for that. So then so take that further. If they start putting hands-on code and mitigating the issues, they the firm, the security firm, takes on a considerable amount of risk in terms of like, well, what if they didn't fix the issue completely? So that is probably more time to get familiar with the application and the code and to fix it correctly or negotiate, which is more money to the client. So they really have to trust you and be alongside, like be with you in that journey. And I do think that there are some firms, and you and I have worked in these scenarios as well, where these firms are on retainers, and you're part of that team because you provide that service at that. But that's a special client, right? That's a client that gets it, and they want that value, and they want to work towards that. But I think that it's finding those clients is rare. So to me, it's kind of what is the systemic solve to that problem. I've toyed with, I like the idea that of where like the frameworks are going, where we're trying to make the secure by default, secure by design thing a part of engineering frameworks. Um, but again, security folks that really care commit to those things, and they're great developers and great security folks, but they don't really get compensated for that, right? And so it's just a tough problem. I think it's a really tough problem. It's like they're
Yeah.
we're not incentivized to help mitigate because no one wants to pay as much money for as they are paying for good hackers, or what they will see as hackers or pen testers, as they are willing to pay for good like secure developers. I just
Yeah,
that's a, and that is an industry perception that we have cultivated over like 30 years, 40 years, is that FUD.
yeah. I mean, I get your point. I think it is pretty rare. I think you and me, we've done a few where there is like hands-on keyboard security people fixing code, and that's pretty rare. And
Right.
that's like when a client's in dire straits and they're like, I just need someone to fix this right now. But I mean, I think there's a happy middle ground, which is giving enough remediation advice, giving a developer's remediation advice without actually fixing the issues. And I think that's where we need to go, which is if you do a source code review and you find whatever SQL injection, and then you give them the actual code that would solve this. They can tweak it. They can make it work, the right way. But here's the ORM function for how you would do this. Um, so it's like I think that's the level we need to go. And I think the thing is like I get where you're coming from that there's the economic issue of there's only so much time you're paying for a certain number of hours. I think my criticism is that people have gotten used to buying shit for a lot of money. Like I think that's what the
Yeah,
issue is. And rates
I
have only
agree.
gone up
Yeah,
in the past few years. And if you're doing a yearly test and you're not getting a lot of results, and of those results you're getting no like, at least the first few steps of how to solve those issues, like why is my question. Why do these
yeah,
firms exist? Why and it's not always just, small random CPA, but like there's some big firms that do kind of the same thing. And I think it is a great money maker for some people, but I just, as someone who does want things to be more secure and has been through, breaches, it's a total nightmare to go through when you're internal. Um, and it has real impacts on people. Like, shouldn't we be actually providing value to folks, especially at the prices that security charges?
I
And so I
agree.
think it's just it's a flaw in security. We're the educated sellers. We know what's best, quote unquote. So why aren't I mean, we just explained why, but I feel like we should be doing more to actually help people versus just selling them their yearly pen test of here's 10 bugs. We'll see you next year. Maybe next year
I
there'll be
mean,
11.
I mean, I definitely agree. Like, one of the things that I had toyed with in the past was, formalizing that the information discovery process as like a workshop and threat model with a client, right? But I think, part of the conversation that I had or was always challenged with was, well, your assessment's going to take, 4 to 6 weeks, and these other folks are going to do it in 2 to 3 weeks. And so why is it more expensive? And then it's kind of like you start explaining, well, we will formalize the threat model, so your outputs are going to be, architecture diagrams you probably didn't have, a list of threats that we're evaluating against. So we know that we're capturing your concerns, and we've captured them formally in a risk register or a threat model. We do the actual assessment, so we'll assess it from start to finish. So that's kind of the service that we share. And then the remediation guidance that we have has more context than most of what you'll find in the market. And I will tell you that a couple of clients really love that. I would say most don't. Most don't, and that might just be my sales technique. I'm not a salesperson, but that was always my struggle, and I still fight the battle of wanting to include that. I've had folks be like, "Well, you don't have to do the threat model, or you don't have to do the mitigation," and it's because what we have cultivated as valuable to clients is that. So I would love to do a better job of sharing that message and taking advice on how to get folks to buy into that for sure. Because I share your mentality, but it's like, you know, it's sometimes it's like trying to sell, a Breitling watch or something to someone that just wants a watch.
Yeah.
I just need I just need my Seiko, or I just want, and it's kind of like, you know, we value the mitigation and the actual threat mitigation, but I think that some organizations, not all, value the result. which is why we're so incentivized to not produce an empty report. When in reality, um, the quality of the work shouldn't be measured on the number of findings. That, you know what I mean? It should be measured on the extent of the effort. Like, how well did you do at evaluating this thing, whether it's
Hmm.
cloud, your pen test, or your assessment? And if it's an empty report, that should give the client confidence that they did a good job. But that's just not the case. Just not the case. It's not
Yeah,
reality.
yeah.
Um,
No, for sure. I mean, if I think it's like if a really good firm gave you an empty report, you'd be like, all right, our security is in pretty good shape. If some fly by night, company gives you an empty report, you're like, crap, what did I just pay for? And what are my vulnerabilities? So I agree with you. Like, we shouldn't base all the value just on number of findings. And there's more to it than that. But we again have sold like, what do we tell people about? Defects, bugs, security issues. That's everything. Focus on that first.
yeah.
And yeah, that's what we have a million Jira issues to fix.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard mindset to change. I mean, I still struggle with it to this day. I've succeeded in convincing folks, and I've definitely failed at convincing folks. Um, yeah, it's just yeah, it's really hard. But I think if anybody is listening to this and has ideas around how to convince folks one way or another, um, or has ideas on how to better contextualize, this conversation, I think that'd be amazing to have that conversation. We may want to bring this up with some of the guests we have coming up and just talk about like how they see the issue or what they would value or how we could work on demonstrating the value of mitigation and findings and working towards that. You know, I don't know.
Yep, definitely.
What final thoughts do you have on this? Because I don't feel like we solved any problems.
Do we ever solve any problems?
No, no. I mean, we usually have some like practical advice of like what you can do
Uh,
to take to your C-suite about how to convince
yeah,
them that mitigation is important.
I would say anyone who's getting a pen test, app test, whatever, I would say the question you should ask the vendors you talk to is, how are you going to help me have less findings next year than this year? And then see how they'll actually work with you to fix those issues. I don't mean
I like that.
literally signing into a Linux box and updating Java. I don't mean that, but I mean, doing actual consulting work, which is consulting someone of how they should solve an issue.
I think that's a really good question. So how will you help me get a different report next year? Right?
Yeah, and it can't
Yeah.
be just we're going to throw the junior intern on the assessment and he doesn't actually know how to turn burp on yet.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Like if we hired you in year 2, how would you how would you help us improve? And if they say a maturity assessment, they're probably probably full of it. Um, um, yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah, like what does the hands-on mitigation look like? I like that. Um, yeah, I don't know. For me, I think it's I struggle with it like I said all the time. So I don't know that my advice is actually that great in this one. Um, but I will say that sometimes it's good to if you have the capability to offer uh, more for less. Like don't shortchange it. If you don't phone it in, if you have a client that you know that like you have a good relationship with or whatever, um, you know, put everything that you can into giving as much of a result in that report as you can. I think that one of the things that sets firms apart is you can tell when someone's really put effort into a report or into even a result or a mitigation, then you can tell when they've done the copy paste from the company vulnerability database.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Final thoughts, plugs, anything?
LastCon 2023 2-day training. infrastructure as remote code execution. It's coming together beautifully, I should say.
Yeah, yeah.
Some
It's
really
got
interesting stuff.
graphics. It's got some images. There's some labs to work on. Um, yeah, if anyone is still listening to this episode, we are going to be at LastCon October, end of October, to do this workshop, and we're going to take you from start to finish, from what Terraform is, how to use Terraform, how to exploit infrastructure as code, um, and some common things that we've seen in the real world, and how to sort of exploit on that. And not only that, but we'll show you how to remediate and mitigate those issues in your Terraform code, because we couldn't. Now we have to do that.
We've pre-called ourselves out.
Yeah. So keep an eye out for that. Please register. I'll drop a link in the show notes, and we really hope to see you there in person, and hope to work with you on Terraform mitigation. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.